Welcome to the Cannabis Review. We've got a great show for you today. For all those who are ever looking for investment in the cannabis world, who are ever wanted to know about investing in the cannabis world, we've got the perfect guest. So on today's show, we've got Oskare Capital. And first up, I'd like to introduce Alex Weemy Stores. Alex is the co-founder and managing partner. And next up, we're going to introduce Dr. John Rogers. John is a managing partner and chief of medical and scientific affairs at Óskare. And very last is Deborah Hutton, who's a partner at Eversheds Sutherland, who specialises in asset management and regulation. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I hope you're all keeping well today.
So far, so good.
So good. Hopefully it'll be even better by the end of this. So I'm going to start off pretty simply with the start of the show and kind of give the audience a little bit of a backstory as to who Óskare is and what the unique selling point is. So Alex, if you want to maybe take this one and explain exactly the position you guys have and a little bit about your company.
Yeah, so Oskare Capital is it's an Irish ICAV, so it's AFM fund was launched in June of this year. We're raising 150 million euros at the moment, so we've started fundraising, and we're getting actually pretty good traction because I think our investment thesis is a lot different than what our people are seeing in the cannabis space. So the story, actually, everybody gets into cannabis for a personal reason. My personal reason is I have a son who's 4, and he has a rare genetic disorder. His name is James. And when he was diagnosed, it's called Potocki syndrome. It's similar to Down syndrome, but on another chromosome. It's extremely rare. 1 in 30,000 people get it. So there's no research that's done. So the only way parents can really find out about how kids are treated, what happens, how they evolve is, you go on Facebook and you join a parent support group. So we started seeing, James was, one of the issues that James has is he has epilepsy, and he had these kind of little seizures. And I saw in the group that a lot of parents were using CBD and stuff to treat different ailments that these kids have. So it goes from, ADHD, epilepsy, anxiety, trouble sleeping. And essentially, they had switched from traditional pharma-based treatments to cannabinoid-based treatments, and we're seeing better outcomes. So I gave John here a call. John, I've known John for a few years, so we both live in Paris. And I asked him the simple question, should I be giving my kid CBD? And he said, I don't know. Let me check. So John checked, and we started digging. One thing led to another, and I've been a VC for 10 years in Europe, and I started scouting around, and I started seeing more and more startups in the space come up in Europe, and John and I were discovering the endocannabinoid system and all the different potential treatments, current and future treatments for medical cannabis, cannabinoids, and also about this system in the a system that we have in our body called the endocannabinoid system that John will probably talk about later. That's basically kind of an area of medical research, which is basically, it's a bit virgin. It's a bit of a virgin area. So one thing led to another. We put a really good team together. We have Bruce Linton, the co-founder of Cannabis Growth, as our non-executive chairman. We have a UK-based managing partner who's a PhD in biochemistry. Her name is Nicola Broughton. She did King's in Oxford and also has a law degree. And she was a VC for 10 years and also is an IP specialist. So, and then we have a very experienced CFO, Gaetano Insalaco, and we have another person in our team called Oliver Lamb, who's an ag tech expert. So essentially, we're a group of people who all like the space, had different reasons for getting into it. And we saw that everybody was doing recreational cannabis, and me being Canadian, I was seeing it blow up, and it kind of went into a bubble and came back down. But we thought that really the way that Europe was going, so Europe, it's been federally legal in a lot of jurisdictions, and it's been about, in some countries, 7-8 years. So there's a lot of research that's being done, and countries like Germany are just starting to get into it. So they've reimbursed 200 million euros of medical cannabis last year. It should probably double this year. Denmark, UK, Ireland, Switzerland, France has just started its trial. So things are moving, and we saw that the markets were much different than in North America. So we thought that there was an opportunity for a team that's really, mix of experienced VCs, cannabis entrepreneur, pharma executive, medical doctors, and scientists to really tackle the more pharmaceutical and services aspect to it versus other segments of the industry, which are recreational MSOs in the US. That's not our cup of tea. So we're kind of more on the pharma side of things, I would say. So that's the kind of main thesis of the fund. And we want to be we think Europe is actually a model that can move to other geographies, right? So you go through, it's regulated pharma products that will then, like similar to Epidiolex, that can then go to other markets. So we think there's a huge opportunity here. We're at a tipping point, and we really have a very, very experienced team to tackle it. So that's Óskare in a nutshell. But we already have, we've already identified 400 companies. We've already done one investment as business angels in Denmark because we couldn't resist the opportunity. We're looking at investments in Ireland, Denmark, UK, everywhere in Europe, really. And we're seeing a lot of very interesting companies with very good teams too, getting into the space. So it's a very exciting place to be at the moment.
Excellent. Okay, I think that gives the viewers an overview of that. And that kind of leads me into the next topic that I wanted to kind of ask you. The Europe versus North America. Why Europe? Why did you decide to go with the fund in Europe? What was more appealing about the European market compared to what's gone over in North America?
Yeah, and you might be surprised because Alex is from Canada and I'm from the East Coast of the United States. We both live in Paris, and I think it gave us some perspective. Alex has been following the cannabis market for several years, and as he mentioned, what we discovered when we began to dig deep in Europe is there are research teams that have been, from a regulatory perspective, they've been allowed to do research with cannabis. The partnership between private industry and government is traditionally very strong. And we had examples, for example, of Germany, where we had products which already were in the pharmacy. And within a short period of time, in a little bit over 2 years, the German government was reimbursing for medical conditions based on prescriptions written by doctors to the tune of 200 million euro. So as we began to look at the regulatory environment, as we began to look at where innovation was happening in the space, and looking at the very complicated political situation in North America, as well as really the busting of the bubble in Canada for predominantly, we would argue, is a recreational business, we thought we needed to really understand what the opportunities were in Europe. And as we began to look at the research teams, we identified actually a top researcher who's now part of our team as a partner, who works at INSERM, which is one of the top research institutes in Europe. He's been working on the receptors in the brain that basically respond to CBD and compounds that are in the family, as Alex mentioned, the endocannabinoid system. And he has an extensive knowledge and network understanding what's been going on in Europe. And in talking with him, spending time with him, we became even more confident that this was the place for us to spend our time. And we began to meet companies, to look at opportunities. And this has really been giving us the confidence that this is the place to be. And maybe Alex, you would like to add on that?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're seeing over here is, as John mentioned, research teams that have been doing fundamental research for several years. And now a lot of these teams are spinning out to do clinical trials. And this market in Europe, doctors are going to want to prescribe something that's been through some kind of regulatory process, right? They're not going to, in the US, it's a model where it's federally illegal, right? But states, basically, there's kind of a non-aggression pact between the states and the federal government, but that can change any day, and it's state by state, right? So some states are rec, some states are rec and med. And in medical, right, you can have a grower that has his own dispensary, who has his doctor in the dispensary. You can go in, say, my foot hurts, and he'll prescribe you some cannabis, right? And it could be completely bogus, but he'll do that. In Europe, that's a no-go. That'll never work. So it's very regulated. So you have to, for a reimbursement to happen, you have to have ailment, treatment, and it has to be better than an existing treatment, or some people don't respond well.
There's got to be evidence-based
Yeah, evidence-based. Yeah, so there needs to be, so evidence-based, there needs to be an evidence-based process in order to prescribe something and have it reimbursed, right? And that model is more towards pharma than it is towards what we call medical. And that's, I think, where the money's going to be made, because we're seeing a lot of big pharma come in. There's a lot of innovation to be done. We've actually mapped out all the IP. So with John, so Zolt Lenke that John mentioned, who's an operating partner, as well as Nickel and our team, we mapped out the IP, and we saw that there was actually huge gaps in the space that could be filled. And we're seeing all kinds of really interesting treatments coming out right now. And it's not just on the pharma side, but it's also on the whole ecosystem side. You know, there's also services, ag-tech companies that are working in an adjacent space that can pivot to cannabis, for example, for outdoor growers in Europe, or for new actives or things like that that replace pesticides. We're seeing patient engagement platforms, different marketplaces. We're seeing CMOs, CROs. We're seeing all kinds of the industry is really starting to build up here. And this industry is actually, on the pharma side, you're going to be able, once you've gone through clinical trials in Europe, we're looking at companies that are doing clinical trials on both sides of the pond, right? So a pharma company in Europe will easily be able to sell their products in other geographies, and that's what big pharma wants, right? And we're looking at a few companies that are potential blockbusters on the pharma side, that today there's no existing treatment for certain things like cannabis addiction, improving cognitive function in people with developmental delays, rare mitochondrial diseases, viral cardiomyopathy. We're seeing all kinds of treatments today that are either better than what people get, and it has much better outcomes, and patients want it. So in Europe, it's a bit slower, right? So it's a lot slower than North America, but it's regulated. And if you have a company that gets that product to market, you're going to get reimbursed, right? Which is essentially very important for the governments, but as well as for the companies that we're targeting. So John, this market, John, I don't know if you have anything to add, but this market is a bit slower.
So I would add that we also find the valuations are very much better here. So there's less money chasing the opportunities, and so that's why we believe this is the time to make the investments, because we have an understanding that the North American investors will be coming to Europe. They're obviously going to have big checkbooks. They're going to wait for things to be developed a little bit further than they perhaps are now. So Alex and our team understands how to work in Europe. We're based here. We have a team in Paris and a team in the UK. We will be able to source and identify and evaluate these deals. And who is going to have the basically the interest in buying our projects in 2 or 3 years? It's going to be the pharma companies, and it's going to be the big investor. And we believe that we're in a good situation really to also be a coaching situation. So both Alex as well as our UK partner have experience working with startups and small companies, serving on boards, basically coaching teams. And I think this will be another value add we bring to our portfolio companies, that we will help them really navigate what's often a very difficult journey for small companies that don't have basically a lot of manpower. They have limited experience, and there are people who are, basically willing to take opportunities as they come along. So not always in the best interest of these companies. So we believe that Óskare is well positioned for basically helping a European-based industry develop, and that's really our commitment. And we've been talking to the European Investment Fund. We're talking with sovereign wealth funds within Europe, because we believe that we can appeal to the need to develop a European-based cannabis, pharma and medical industry.
Yeah, and one last thing too that we should mention is, what's the most important part is, it's federally legal in Europe, right? What we're doing is federally legal. Countries are a bit slow to get programs off the ground, but they're now off the ground, and we're looking at potential exponential growth in terms of patients, because medical cannabis in its nature is a patient-driven initiative, right? Patients actually went to court in different, in North America and Canada to fight to get this treatment, right? So it's a patient-driven initiative. So that's why we're also bullish on the potential market, right? And we understand European regulations. We understand Europe. We know where to scout. I can give you one quick example of one company that we invested in called Octarine Bio. These guys were working on cannabis. These guys had disrupted an industry in food and fragrance. They made vanillin, which is one of the world's most sold food and fragrance extracts, right? And this team had developed a new way to do it using synthetic biology, so cells, right, instead of a chemical process. This massively disrupted the industry, and the team actually had a patent, and this team started working on cannabinoids. I found them in 2019, before the company was even created, right? We invested in it right after creation as a business angel syndicate. And now they're developing their platform over several different verticals. So novel cannabinoids, and this is what's important also for Europe, is we can do legal research on novel new cannabinoids. So we take a CBD molecule and you add another molecule to it. So in their case, it's glucose, so sugar. And that means in theory, you can make it a lot easier. It's not fatal for the cell. CBD, when you make it in a cell, it's very fatal. Don't like it. It's water soluble. And in terms of pharmacological potential, it has 4 to 5 times more bioavailability. We found these guys 2 years ago, right? And we're finding these companies now that other people will never find. They'll find them in 2 years once they're up and running. That's what John was saying about medical teams and other research teams in other spaces. We know where to find them, right? And that's the advantage of Europe, is you have all these really good research teams that are doing stuff, spinning up.
They need money.
Yeah, they need money. And in Europe too, we have a great grant scheme. So for every private euro you put in, you usually get a public euro somewhere. So there's also that extra leverage that we get above North America in terms of a capital markets perspective, not in terms of regulation, but that is a bit of the difference. So it's a bit slower to take off, but once it takes off, it can go very fast.
Okay, so strategic play to get in early doors to a highly entrepreneurial territory in the world sounds like a smart way to be doing business, which kind of leads me on to the next topic you kind of alluded to there. And it's something that I think a lot of our audience are going to want to know about, is the medical versus recreational industries, shall we call them. Now, we know Óskare heavily is focused on the medical side of it, but how do you see the two different industries coinciding with each other? Do you see a recreational market ever coming to the European territories, or can you see it being medically created products distributed via pharmacies, or will there be another, let's say, I think the dream scenario for a lot of viewers would be that there's the equivalent of a dispensary that you could go to over here and buy a range of products from a specific store, or do you only see it being prescribed by a doctor and being allowed to be collected by a pharmacy? I think, John, if you'd like to hit this one.
Yeah, so it's going to be a moving landscape. I think that we understand that there is a black market now, and there's a supply to patients. There's a supply to people who are looking for an alternative to alcohol or tobacco. And there's a sector that is understanding that maybe you could create a health and wellness kind of over-the-counter market with products. And obviously there's an interest in putting CBD, which is a constituent molecule, in food items. And that's something that obviously has a lot of regulatory consequence and being hashed out here in Europe. But from a perspective of Oskare Capital, we felt as though, first of all, the recreational market and being in the sector of growing cannabis and basically getting it into the channels for providing product for recreational purposes, non-medical, we felt as though already we know there's a global probably oversupply of product. It's becoming commoditized in some countries. It is basically a commodity and prices are dropping. We felt as though with the expertise of this team that we put together, this was not a place for us to spend our time. We're focusing on the medical area because we believe this is high value. There are also unmet needs. So my little story is that I'm a neurologist. I trained in New York. I worked in the field of neurodegenerative disease, including Parkinson's disease. But then I went to work for the company that brought Botox to the world. This is the company called Allergan. And what is the beauty of this molecule, botulinum toxin, is it can treat many different medical conditions. So it's now used to treat children with cerebral palsy. It's used to treat migraine headache. It's used to treat overactive bladder. It can be used to treat spasms of neck muscles. Obviously, everybody knows it helps get rid of the wrinkles, but this is one molecule that has many different medical purposes. Alex alluded to this endocannabinoid system. I did not study the endocannabinoid system in medical school. I don't remember. We know that basically the interest, really in this check and balance system, it's an important way for the body to basically handle problems such as inflammation, to handle situations which there needs to be a reset by the body. It's basically a homeostatic system. It gets activated when the body is injured, when the body is basically under assault by a virus or cancer. And what the research teams have been sharing with us since we began looking into the work is that this is an incredibly powerful system that is just now being fully recognized. I would say that the conversation until recently, if you talk to people, they thought, well, the future is basically in CBD and THC. And those, that's basically what people know about from the plant, the cannabis plant. And obviously there have been strains that have been developed that manipulate the concentration of those. But it's actually a much more interesting story because, as Alex said, we now are looking at the over 100 different molecules that can be isolated from the plant. And we also can now make mimics of these molecules. We can add functional groups. And then there are molecules that have nothing to do with CBD or THC that are biologically active, that interact, that stimulate or modulate this system. And this is actually where the future is of the medical and pharma world. And we believe the opportunity in Europe is there will be a coexistence of basically both kind of streams of research. So there'll be the molecules that are plant-based. So those are basically what we call the phytocannabinoids. And we know there's a very big hemp industry. There's a big agricultural sector here in Europe that we believe needs to be supported. Alex and our other colleague, Ali, have worked basically in the ag tech world. So we are able really to engage with those players and in some cases help them pivot to the opportunities we see in the marketplace. And then we have the people who are coming out of the research labs who are engaged or have experience working, developing pharmaceutical compounds. We believe that some of the opportunities will basically be coming from both streams. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the good news is that the quality of the research work has really gone, basically it's improved to such a degree that now the research is very credible. In the past, we had people who were advocates of cannabis, and they would basically be doing a small study with product that they grew in their backyard. But now we actually have research teams. They're following the formal protocols that are approved by ethics committees. So we believe that we're going to get the kind of answers which have been suggested by prior research, but we're now going to be able to get it in a form that will drive the right decisions.
Okay.
Yeah, so to just go on rec versus medical in Europe, I mean, it's a country by country. I mean, rec is a completely different ballgame, I think, here. So we've had the Netherlands, which is very tolerant on it, but it's not really legal on the rec side. So I mean, as John mentioned, we're focusing on the medical side, and I don't really see dispensaries happening, at least in EU 27. Because once again, it's reimbursed by the state, right? So they want to have a certain level of control over reimbursement. So I think there might end up being a dual track one day with coffee shops and a pharmacy next door selling perhaps very similar products. But in the end, in order to get reimbursed, right, in Europe, it needs to have some kind of evidence-based data, right? So I think North America is not Europe, and I think we'll see what happens in North America on the rec side. But for us, it really doesn't impact us too much, because the investors that we're talking to are really interested on the more scientific approach and this new, this kind of new unknown system called the endocannabinoid system that John mentioned, and we think our route will probably be one that'll create a significant amount of value for patients, but also for investors.
Okay.
I think the recreational side is a little bit of a political football. And secondly, it seems by understanding what's happened today that the governments are showing favor to first moving ahead on the medical cannabis side. I think there's more confidence that this is the right first step before opening the doors for basically a recreational market. So you have a lot of mixed messages, and we believe that from an investment point of view, that's an opportunity, but probably a little bit less certain.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that kind of gives the audience an overview of the position you're taking, why we think medical is going to be the winner over recreational in Europe. The very last topic that I wanted to touch on was doing business in Ireland. Why did you pick Ireland? The reasons for it. And I think I'm going to bring in Deborah for this one. If you could give us a little bit of background and information, and then maybe pass it on to Alex and give it his reviews.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing I would note when you're setting up a regulated fund, the reputation of the regulator is key. And Ireland is one of the largest funds industries in Europe, and the reputation of the central bank is excellent in Europe. So that's, we find that a lot of investors coming into these type of structures want to be in a product, albeit that it may be invested in these cannabis or cannabis-related technology companies or medical cannabis. The investors want to know that that is a regulated fund, that your investment is safe, that there's the right checks and balances. So as a jurisdiction, it's the size, it's the quality of our service providers, but also Ireland has experience distributing out into the rest of the world, and raising finance. So that's another point of expertise. One of the things that Ireland is also an expert in is looking at the new and novel asset classes, and the central bank has an actual procedure around that, where the central bank will ask additional questions around an asset class that may have additional risks associated with it. So there's a very, very defined mechanism there. In terms of other cannabis funds in Ireland, there was an exchange traded cannabis fund, and that was the HAN ETF. And I believe you had HAN ETF speaking to you previously.
We
and
did
they
indeed,
yeah. Medical cannabis is an emerging industry with high growth and potential for investor interest. But the thing about the HAN ETF UCITS, that's an ETF structure. What is very different about the Óskare fund is it is a private equity fund. And that means the type of investors that come into this fund be professional investors or high net worth. And what a private equity company does, and you've heard the expertise of John and Alex and Ollie, where they can look at the underlying technology from a medical perspective, a technology perspective, a real world practical perspective, and utilize the service providers in Ireland. But they will also take that investment they've received and use that to invest in those underlying companies. And if we look at, COVID and what's happening across Europe, the impact of COVID on jobs globally, is quite frightening. CSO released statistics in May 2020. 47% of the workforce in Ireland suffered some form of impact. Of this 47%, 13% was a job loss, 33% temporarily laid off. What was interesting was there was a lot of press around the release when Óskare got authorised by the central bank, and a lot of companies in Ireland and elsewhere were very keen to see investment in their companies in what is essentially an ESG strategy, looking at medicine, looking at developments in this area, the social piece as well, in terms of female health. And when we look at the potential of Brexit, which is quite interesting, because the UK is actually, in terms of statistics there, the UK is one of the largest industries for medical cannabis, and particularly around the growers in Europe. And it'd be interesting to see issues that they have potentially as a result of Brexit. And we touched, in the use of medical cannabis in the treatment of epilepsy, but there was a recent case in the UK where the UK NHS has legislated for the prescription of medical cannabis in certain circumstances, and one being the treatment of epilepsy. So that's quite interesting to see, and this type of case where individuals are now saying, yes, this is now the type of medicine that we want to prescribe. In terms of Ireland and the potential for wealth to Ireland Inc., if we look at legal medical cannabis sales in Europe, now I'm looking at old stats because I'm not an asset manager, I'm a lawyer. But in 2018, across Europe, that was about 316 million. And it's experiencing double-digit growth. And figures are indicating that we could see the market topping in Europe 2.6 billion by 2024 and 14 billion by 2029. So it is great to see these type of companies with that type of expertise to do that due diligence and not be investing in assets that could be dropping, whether you're pro or anti-recreational cannabis, proven medical technologies, proven technology-related companies, seeing investments in Europe and ideally in Ireland from these type of companies would be something that I would imagine would be welcomed, and certainly that was the feedback that we had received. The other thing about Eversheds Sutherland, we would be advising clients globally in respect of medical cannabis because of some of the issues that Alex touched upon earlier, conflict between state and federal law, looking at the different regimes and cross rules across the globe. And that was very interesting in terms of the approach that this client took to establishment in Ireland, which was getting global audit providers, depositories, administrators, law firms to put in place best-in-class procedures for the protection of the asset, valuation, underlying due diligence. So there's a multitude of reasons that I would say that Ireland is an excellent jurisdiction, and it'd be interesting to know if Alex and John share that view.
Well, Deborah, we wouldn't be on this call if we didn't. So there you go. I can explain to you our journey a bit and why now we're Irish super fans. So basically, I mean, this idea has been, you know, John's been with me since the beginning. We were the kind of two first guys who got it started. And so we met, so Gaetano's our CFO. We've been working together for years. We worked together 7 years when I was at Truffle Capital as a VC. And we approached him and he said, listen, this is a great idea, but you need a regulated fund. I mean, you don't want to do a holding or anything really weird in some Caribbean island somewhere or some Anglo-Norman island. And he said, listen, let's start looking if this thing is legal. So we got a legal opinion done and we saw that, you know, we were operating in a completely regulated industry here in Europe and in other countries as well, because we're once again focusing a bit more on the pharmaceutical side of things. And basically, we started in France. So we had a French lawyer. We're based here, and we talked to the French lawyer, and he said, "Let me talk to the French regulator about your idea to do a cannabis fund." So we talked to the regulator, and France is one of the countries I think where there's still a bit of stigma around medical cannabis. So the discussion was rather was kind of they weren't really too sure if they didn't really know what to do with the topic. It was like kind of coming out of left field. So we then said, well, maybe we should, you know, Luxembourg. We looked at, you know, good jurisdictions. So Luxembourg is one of them. And so we started looking at Luxembourg. And then because France, I mean, the guy was like, it'll take 18 months to get this fund going. We can do it. We saw the legal opinion, but it'll take you forever. So he said, the guy basically told us, go to Luxembourg. So the French guy at the regulator was nice, like, go to Luxembourg. So we went to Luxembourg, and then we found a few people that were willing to work with us, but the cost was very expensive. And they said, once again, 12 to 18 months to get the thing up and running. And then we actually met with a fund manager who said, we're in Ireland, you should check out Ireland. And we said, holy cow, this makes sense. One, it's English speaking. So for American investors, it's a lot easier to do stuff in English than in French. And two, like the Irish, I have a lot of Irish friends. They're super pragmatic people. So Gaetano got in touch with Deborah. What was it like in this? When was it? November of last year?
Yeah.
No, November, December. And then actually, so Deborah is for us one of the key pillars of this thing because she got it done. So we know nobody, and we know a few people in Ireland, but they're not in her profession. And basically, she put everything together. So we're using an Irish IFM called Crossroads Capital Management. They're great people. We're using, she got us the 5th biggest fund administrator in the world. Apex is our fund administrator. She found us KPMG in Ireland, who's our fund auditor. Like we have tier 1 names, and we got it done in 6 months in a topic that is brand new. So we're the first regulated AIFM fund in the world doing medical cannabis. And this really reassures investors, right? So that was one of the reasons we did it. And Ireland, I mean, not only was it probably, I shouldn't say this, but half the price of Luxembourg, it was fast, and the people are pragmatic, and they believe in the project, you know, they're open-minded people. So for me, I would not hesitate to do business in Ireland. I mean, who knows, I might end up moving there at some point, you know, it's such a great place. So we're very, very pleased, and our Irish partners are helping us raise funds. They're putting us in touch with investors. I mean, we couldn't ask for anything better, honestly. I'm a super fan of Ireland. So
and our fund is able to be presented all over Europe. So that was actually also, we needed to have the passport option so that we could market our fund across Europe.
Okay, very interesting. On that note of you loving Ireland and think it's the greatest country in the world, I think we're going to wrap it up there. For anybody who wants to get more information on the Oskare Capital Group, you can see the websites there scrolling on the screen below. So OskareCapital.com for everybody. Alex, John, Deborah, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I hope we'd be able to touch base with you guys in about 6 to 12 months and see how some of the investments are going on and see the different positions and strategies you've taken. I think the viewers would love to hear that.
Yeah, and we'll grab maybe when we're able to travel again, we'll meet up in Dublin, or Deborah, we'll meet up in France. All right.
Have a good day, guys. Thanks very much for watching, everybody.
Bye-bye.